Occurred only a minute and 12 into the flight. Now, let us pause and review for you what we think we know as of this hour. Still no official announcement from NASA as to the fate of the crew of 6 and the school teacher passenger aboard the space shuttle. The space shuttle Challenger exploded into that gigantic fireball about a minute and 12 seconds after liftoff. Apparently, underscore that word, apparently all seven members aboard the flight were killed. I emphasize again, as Bruce Hall has been doing, that there were no ejection seats aboard the space shuttle Challenger. As Bruce pointed out, in the early space shuttles, they had put ejection seats. That's when they had far fewer crew members. But two things quickly became apparent. First of all, those who rode the early shuttles apparently came back and said, listen, you're kidding yourself if you think anyone could survive with an ejection seat if anything goes wrong. And that's point number one. Point number two, as the number of people put aboard the space shuttles grew, it was determined we're only kidding ourselves by putting these ejection seats in, and there were no ejection seats aboard the shuttle this morning. Now, there's been no announcement on the fate of the crew after the explosion this morning, but it appeared there was no way they could survive. You look at the videotape and you say to yourself, how could anyone survive that? No American astronaut ever has been killed in flight. 3 were killed on the launch pad in 1967. The current NASA administrator, William R. Graham, was meeting with congressmen on Capitol Hill about the NASA budget when they saw the disaster on television. Steve Goldstein, who's an aide to Representative Manuel Lujan, who's a Republican of New Mexico, Steve Goldstein said, and I quote, NASA officials told the congressman it doesn't look like any lives were saved, unquote. The other crew members aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger this morning, that is besides schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe of Concord, New Hampshire, were the commander, Francis R. Scobie, 46, the pilot, Michael J. Smith, aged 40, 36-year-old Judith Resnick, Ronald E. McNair, 35 years old, Ellison S. Onizuka, 39, and Gregory B. Jarvis, 41. Schoolteacher McAuliffe, well, they now have the names under the photographs. And let's pause for a second and ponder the faces of the 7 people who were aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger this morning. The $1.2 billion spacecraft, one of 4 in NASA's shuttle fleet, was destroyed, completely obliterated. Parts of the ship fell into the Atlantic about 18 miles southeast of the launch pad. On a slow-motion video rerun of the explosion, as we've shown you, it was difficult to determine the exact source of the explosion. Bruce Hall passed along the theories put forward by veteran observers there. One theory was that the explosion...
One of the astronauts who was on board, as I mentioned before, Dick Scobie, was a good friend, somebody who had predicted to me that someday some tragedy like this would happen. So we have 6 families, as well as Christy McAuliffe's, watching this tragedy today.
Absolutely. We don't want to overlook that. These are, on the other hand, people who know the risks as they go in. They go in as volunteers, and they are taught what the risks are as they go along. There is the crew that you saw today with Dick Scobie in the middle, and it is a tragedy of enormous proportions. There are just too few ways to say it, frankly, except in our own minds. We've all watched this space program for 25 years now, and we've had just 3 deaths prior to this, but now it appears that 7 more today, and it is something in which our national pride is all wrapped up in one form or another, and of course we do feel an attachment to these people, not just to the school teacher, but to the astronauts. They're part of America's folk heroes at this time in our lives. At Cape Canaveral, Steve Delaney standing by at the Kennedy Space Center. Steve?
You were talking a moment ago about watching the space program for 25 years. Jay Barbary has been covering it for NBC radio and occasionally television for a good deal longer than that. You've seen death here before. You've seen explosions before. You were here when that little grapefruit-sized thing blew up back about, what, 57, the first time we tried to get something up in the air.
It was December the 6th, right, 57.
And in all that time, you probably have learned more about how these things work and why they're so careful than anybody else. What does all that knowledge lead you to today in terms of trying to figure out what did happen here?
Well, Steve, it's difficult to understand that it could have happened because all of these systems are fed through computers before they lift off, and all the computers have to write them off, have to say everything is fine. In fact, the flight controllers in Houston, they were saying that everything was fine. No one saw anything. But as we look at the videotape as it goes back, it's apparent what happened was that the explosion started at the base of the huge external fuel tank. And you
that
have
big
to,
silo thing,
right.
and the space vehicle sits on it like a butterfly on a tree stump.
That's right. It's hanging beneath it. They're going into orbit underneath at this time. Now, the ducts that come out of the big tank feed into the engines. And I believe we're getting ready to look at it now.
No,
we just missed it. Anyway, they feed into the engines.
Yeah.
And it appeared from what we can see on the videotape that that's where the explosion began. Something happened there in the big ducts going from the tank into the engines themselves. And it was right after Dick Scobie was told to go for throttle up, which means they have passed through the maximum dynamic pressure and they're ready to start feeding more throttle.
So they're up through most of the atmosphere and they're heading for outer space at that
Right.
point then. And your look at that suggests
nobody could have survived that explosion, and that there are no survivors from what happened today. The president did come in and talk to a group of reporters who were having a briefing on the State of the Union, which the president says he will still go ahead and deliver tonight. He talked about the tragedy. He saw it on television. He saw a replay of it only moments after the explosion. He said he was more than saddened. It was a tremendous shock. He says he cannot get the teacher, Krista McCulloch, off his mind, although he did talk about the other brave people and their sacrifice. He talked about the families and how his heart goes out to all of them. He said this would definitely cast a pall over his State of the Union address tonight that was supposed to be very upbeat. He was going to be looking toward the future, and in fact had written in a passage about Krista McCulloch and the future, the space shuttle program, the new frontier. He was asked by the reporters in the room what he would like to have people telling children who might have been especially interested in this flight because a teacher was aboard. And he said that he would like them to talk about Krista McCulloch and the others as pioneers who had sacrificed their life on the great frontier, and that just because of one tragedy, we cannot stop going forward. He was asked, what if a backlash develops over the space program because of this? And he said that he would be a voice opposing doing anything to stop the program because it is our new frontier and the only frontier we have. I can tell you, Dan, that there is real grief at the White House, as you can well imagine, as I'm sure there is all across the country, but a special grief because Krista McCulloch was here at the White House when she was named to be the teacher to go on this flight. I happened to have been in the room. She did not know till she got here that she'd been the chosen one, and the president...
Together and separately. There was no indication whatsoever that they were going to have any trouble with this launch today. Was there any feeling going on at the Kennedy Space Center that, in fact, that they may have been pushing the civilian program a little too rapidly?
Civilian side. Question is, were they getting the civilian flights personnel too quickly?
Well, Tom, I don't want to be unfair to the people here, but the thing that you have to realize is that they were going for 15 shots this year, and a lot of the old hands that were here through Mercury, through Gemini, through Apollo, that guarded this mission, that were very careful. They made sure that everything was absolutely correct before they flew. They're gone. It's a new face that's in here today that's flying the shuttle, and they are doing them. They are talking about doing 24 a year and even 36 a year, and they're gearing up to flying with 2 pads, to flying these four spacecraft at all times, keeping them in the air. So there was a little sense of, yes, you are rushing it too fast. But again, we go back to the fact that the computers okayed it all. Everybody okayed it all.
It was good until it went bad.
It was good until it went bad, and no one knows what happened. And who can say that if they were flying 6 months apart, that this would not have happened?
Jay, thank you. Tom, we don't know any more now than we did approximately an hour and a half ago when we first began to understand the scope of all this. When we do, I guess we'll be back.
Thank you very much. Steve Delaney and Jay Barbary at Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida today. And with me now here in our Washington studios is Marcia Smith. She's the executive director of the National Commission on Space. It's a presidential commission.
Yes, it is.
The future of space does not look very promising this afternoon, Mrs. Smith.
Well, this certainly has been a terrible tragedy. We're not sure quite what the implications are going to be for the long-term future right now. Depends on what the problem was, what caused it.
But wouldn't you expect that there would be a public outcry for the shuttle program to shut down for a good long time until they're absolutely certain that all the glitches are out of it? We've had delay on launch now. We've had weather problems, of course, that have caused some of that, but there have been little problems along the way, and now, tragically, a 7-person crew has been lost.
I hope that there is not a national outcry to shut the shuttle program down, and I'm quite confident that NASA would not launch again until it was quite certain that there was no danger to its crew. So I think that NASA will follow the procedures that it has established for these types of tragedies, as they did at the Apollo fire back in 1967. I'm sure that it will be quite a long time before we see another shuttle launch, but I hope that the public does not suddenly turn against the manned space program.
Conceptually, has the United States had too much of its investment in the shuttle program and not enough in other space programs? As you well know, there are people who are interested in space saying too much money is being spent on the shuttle and not enough on other scientific research programs.
Well, actually, the percentage of the space science budget, which is the people who normally complain about that are the space scientists, and the percentage of the space science budget relative to the rest of the NASA budget has actually remained fairly constant throughout the entire history of the space agency. Now, that's beginning to change now because the operations costs of the space shuttle have become so large and space science programs are now getting cut back. But I don't think it would be fair to say that too large of a percentage is being devoted to the manned program.
We are in a numbers crunch in terms of the budget in this country right now with Graham Rudman and other programs coming along to cut things back. The space shuttle program was supposed to be self-sustaining at some point. That is, the private enterprise would be able to carry the load because of the experiments that were conducted in outer space. That now has been delayed. So there's going to be a real budget crunch, isn't there, for the space program?
It's unclear. A lot of the budget costs in NASA's budget are for operating the shuttle. If we don't have shuttle flights for a year or so while they're investigating this accident, then that money, it may go into redesigning whatever piece of equipment went wrong on this flight. But it could be, in that sense, you know, as terrible as this was, that may be one result of it, that NASA does not have to spend so much money on shuttle operations in the near-term future. I would not think that that would last very long, however, so I don't think it will have much effect on the split between the unmanned and the manned programs.
Do you think that as a society that we've just become too sanguine about space and space launches, that we think that nothing can go wrong because they always seem to go right?
Well, I think that NASA has a very impressive record on manned and unmanned launches, and perhaps we become a little too complacent. These things are dangerous. The astronaut crews certainly recognize it. It's a risk they're willing to take.
Marcia Smith, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you. It's hard to know at this time, of course, what the political fallout is likely to be, but my guess is that one result of this explosion today on the shuttle program is that the critics of the President's Strategic Defense Initiative, the SDI or Star Wars program, will use this as one more example of just how wrong things can go in space, and that you can't count on a Star Wars or SDI kind of program as a fail-safe defense against an incoming nuclear attack. So that will be part of the equation as well. Here's what happened today, about 1 minute and 15 seconds at about 5 miles up, downrange about 18 miles from the Kennedy Space Center. Here is the launch once again. For those of you who are just joining us,
solid rocket booster engine gimbal now underway. T-minus 15 seconds.
That's the external tank, the orange tank that you see in the background, and we believe, based on our own speculation, that that may have been the source of the problem. It fuels those engines. Those are the main engines at the bottom of the spacecraft, which is a kind of engine with an airplane with short wings. Everything is normal here.
The 25th space shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Challenger. Good roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading down range.
I'm waiting. I got the rest of the insurance.
Engines beginning throttling down now.
Those are the solid rocket boosters, the long white rockets on either side. They are supposed to separate, and then they are recovered via parachute, and the plane, the space shuttle itself, goes on into orbit under normal conditions.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs.
APUs are auxiliary power units. Engines at 65%.
57 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
Now he's going to tell him to go to full throttle, and that's when it happens.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up. 1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
And there it was. An eerie, tragic beauty in the skies over Florida today. Tragedy of enormous proportions. 7 people killed, we believe. their families obviously deeply affected, as is the nation, as is the space program. Here it is in slow-mo. It's hard to imagine that anyone could have survived that. The only solid piece of debris we see is the solid rocket booster off to the side. There were no astronauts in that, of course. The Space Shuttle Challenger itself seems to have come apart. Debris fell into the ocean. Recovery vessels were quickly in place, but they couldn't enter the recovery area because the debris continued to fall. They're there now. We have not heard how they're doing at this point. We do expect Senator John Glenn in the Senate gallery within 5 minutes or so. Of course, Senator Glenn is a veteran astronaut. He was the first American to make an orbital flight of the Earth back in the early days of the space program and the Mercury capsule. John Palmer is in New York with additional information for us. John?
Yes, Tom, the Soviet news agency TASS has now made mention of this. Just one line on it. The U.S. Space Shuttle Challenger exploded shortly after takeoff today. There is no comment. The Soviet Union, of course, is the only other country that has sent people up into space, and the Soviet Union has, of course, reported the death of 4 Soviet cosmonauts. Prior to today, 3 American astronauts had lost their lives. There is this word, according to a spokesman for Lloyd's of London, all of the crew members of the shuttle flights are offered the opportunity for life insurance, written by Lloyd's of London, and a spokesman for Lloyd's of London says that only one of the astronauts, and that was Krista McAuliffe, the school teacher, took advantage of that life insurance. She took out a policy of $1 million on her life. She, along with the other 6 members of the Space Shuttle Challenger, now presumed to have been lost shortly after 11:30 this morning, when the Space Shuttle Columbia exploded about a minute after launch from Cape Canaveral. Let's go back now to Washington and Tom Brokaw. Tom?
Thank you, John Palmer. There is a problem, and we hope before the afternoon is out to deal with some people who will be here to help you as you deal with your children. We hope to have a child psychologist, because a lot of children have been watching the space program, including the students of Krista McAuliffe. Now at the Senate Gallery on Capitol Hill, Senator John Glenn.
But the people that were on the flight today carried our hopes and dreams along with them, and they'll live forever in our memories. And I guess that's the best tribute we can give to them. Our prayers, our sympathy, our condolences go out to their families and friends, and I guess that's about all we can say about them right at this time. It's been an amazing success story up to this very tragic accident today. I think this was, what, the 56th or 57th manned mission, where we're dealing with new complexities and speeds and powers that man has never used before. And we had hoped to push this day back forever, but that was not to be, and we all, I guess, intuitively knew that. So today we don't want to repeat, that's for sure.
Senator, what effect does this have on a space program or any sort of flight test program when something like this happens?
Oh, it delays things, of course, because there will be a very complete investigation. Our view of what happened this morning would be only speculation at this point, although the very slow-motion pictures I saw on one of the channels a little while ago seemed to show the first light coming out of one of the solid rocket cases. Whether that'll turn out to be the cause of the difficulty or not, I don't know. But I wouldn't think that this was, you know, what it'll do to the program or how much it'll be set back will be dependent on the investigation.
Was NASA trying to push too hard on this, Senator?
No, I don't think so. If there's one thing NASA has not done all the way through, it is take a chance on cutting corners. And we've grown accustomed to success. It's been an amazingly successful program so far. You know, I remember one of the TV commentators, I won't say which network, but one morning talking about when there was a delay, commenting, when are we going to get turn this turkey into an eagle? We'd become so accustomed to getting these things off on time that safety was obviously being, at least in that commentator's mind, was being given short shrift. Why aren't we running these things like a regular airline schedule? Well, the fact that NASA has not done that. They've run it with the idea of safety first and foremost, and that's been the way it's been operated ever since the days when I was in that program many years ago. And it's a tribute to them that they have not been goaded under pressure to taking any chances. And we'll just have to wait the accident analysis to see what happened in this case.
Senator, were you watching the blast-off this morning?
I was not. I was in a classified briefing at the time, and one of my staff people brought a note in to me about this, and then I left immediately and went up to my office.
What was your reaction, particularly to the replays you've probably seen?
Oh, my reaction was a profound sense of loss, I guess, that this day had finally come that we'd hoped would never arrive. In some ways, I guess it's, you know, in our human existence, let me be philosophical for a moment. I guess in our human existence there is triumph and there is tragedy. And man tries many things. And we advance as a whole human race because we succeed most of the time. We make advances, whether it's in space or engineering or health or medical things. Sometimes, though, we aren't perfect. And then there's a tragedy that brings us back to our own human frailties and our lack of perfection. And so that's the kind of a day we're faced with now. It's been an amazingly successful series of triumphs through the years. But it also is fraught with the possibility of tragedy, and that's what we came up against today.
When you say that this was a day that was pushed back for safety, was it inevitable that it would finally come?
Well, I think everyone that's ever had any connection with the program has felt that someday there would be a loss in flight. We're dealing with tremendous powers and speeds. You're traveling in orbit at 5 miles a second and trying to get back into the atmosphere from that kind of speed. And so, are we going to be perfect forever? I guess the answer was proven this morning, that the answer to that is no. But that doesn't mean that man doesn't keep trying in these areas and that we're not just as dedicated to seeing that this kind of research goes on.
Senator, you've been part of a small and very select community of people, the community of astronauts. What does this do to that community when something like this happens?
Well, we've never had something like this happen before, except for the pad fire, the fire on the pad that claimed 3 lives. Gus Grissom, Ned White, and Roger Chafee back in '67, I believe it was. So we went through that tragedy then, but that was not an in-flight accident. Obviously, there will be a shared sense of loss in the whole astronaut group and community, everybody associated with the whole program, whether astronauts or all those in the supporting functions. But I'm sure their dedication is going to be to find out what caused this and correct it and get on with the next flight.
Do astronauts just simply accept this as part of the job?
I think any time you go into flying or test flying, or which all of us were in prior to being in the astronaut program early on, you accept risks, but you feel that the risks are worth it for the country and the importance of what you're doing. And you're willing to take those risks. And that's the way we looked at it back then. That's the way I'm sure all of the current group of astronauts looks at it.
How much more of a tragedy is this, since it was the first launch of a citizen in space?
The loss of human life doesn't have much to do with who's military and who's civilian. It's a tragedy for their friends and families, and I don't differentiate between the loss of life, whether it was the regular flight crew or whether it was a civilian on board with them.
Well, how much does it set back the Citizen in Space program, do you think?
I don't know. I have no way of knowing at this point. They had lined up some other people to go, of course. Whether this will affect that or not, I don't know.
Do you think it should?
Does this raise questions for the SDI program?
No, I don't think so, because the technologies that were being used here as far as thrust and the engines and whatever happened here, I think probably are not likely to affect the research going on for lasers and laser projection and formable mirrors and particle beam projection and things like that. I would not think it likely that there was a connection there.
Senator, are you
concerned now, or have you ever been concerned about the way NASA procures parts?
No, I never have. NASA has bent over backwards to be as safe as they possibly can be. And whether this will prove to be a one-time difficulty from whatever cause, or whether it will be a design defect that is uncovered now that we can correct, or whatever, we'll have to await analysis. But there's no way of knowing right now, just now, a couple of hours after the accident, to know what happened.
Senator, thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Senator John Glenn at the Capitol Hill Press Gallery. Senator Glenn, of course, a veteran of the NASA Astronaut Corps. He talked quite eloquently, it seems to me, about the price of advancing human knowledge sometimes requires the sacrifice of human lives. And he spoke with great feeling as well about what appeared to be the deaths of the astronauts today. To his practiced eye, it did appear that the trouble may have emanated from one of the solid rocket boosters on either side of the space shuttle itself. The rest of us who've been looking at it thought that it might have come from the external tank. We don't yet have any official confirmation from NASA if, in fact, the space agency knows itself what may have happened there. There was an accumulation of ice on a very cold Florida morning today around the base of the shuttle where the main engines are situated. We're going to show that to you now, but everything indicates that there was nothing wrong at the time of liftoff today at 11:38 Eastern Time. They had been worried about weather earlier on in case they had to make an emergency landing at the Cape. There were stiff winds yesterday, for example. This is the ice that accumulated at that time. Whether that had anything to do with it, we don't know. We're just trying to show you as much as we possibly can about what was going on there before this accident today, before this terrible tragedy. For those of you just joining us, it appears that all 7 astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger were lost when it blew up about 1 minute and 15 seconds into its flight at an altitude of about 5.5 miles altogether. Krista McAuliffe, the school teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, was on board. Her husband and 2 children were watching at the time, along with her parents and members of her 3rd grade class carrying a banner that said, "Go, Krista, go." Frame by frame now, this is what happened. That is the shuttle at the bottom half of the rocket apparatus. Now the explosion begins. It's very hard to tell, but it does seem to me that it did not happen within that solid rocket booster on this side of the spacecraft. It could have happened, of course, on the other one. But there is the possibility as well that it might have happened with the external tank. That is the big tank, and we're going to repeat some of this for those of you who are watching us continually here, because we know that people are just joining us along the way. But that big orange tank is, in effect, a bomb. It is a large vessel carrying 560,000 pounds of highly volatile oxygen and hydrogen. It feeds the fuel to the main tanks, which are at the bottom of the space shuttle itself. And as they went to full throttle, from 65% power to full throttle, 104%, it was very shortly after that that the explosion occurred. So it does appear that there may have been some connection between going to full throttle and the explosion itself. And given the size of the explosion and the fact that we saw one of the solid rockets peel off to the side, it appears that that's where it may have happened. At the White House now, Deputy Press Secretary Larry speaks.
Postpone the State of the Union address that was scheduled for this evening. He will address the Congress and the American people on next Tuesday. The President, in addition, has asked the Vice President to go immediately to Cape Canaveral's Kennedy Space Center, along with the acting NASA Director, Bill Graham. The Vice President will carry with him the President's personal concern for those courageous Americans who were aboard the space shuttle. In addition, the President will speak to the American people from the Oval Office later this evening regarding this tragedy. The President, since learning of the tragedy shortly before noon, has conferred with Don Regan, who in turn consulted with Speaker Tip O'Neill and Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole. They concurred in the President's decision to delay his State of the Union. A few moments ago, the President met in the Oval Office with NASA Director Graham and instructed him to fly to the Cape with the Vice President to begin an effort to find out the cause of this tragedy. And then the President said to go forward with the nation's space program. The President said, and I quote, "These people were dedicated to the exploration of space. We could do no more to honor them, these courageous Americans, than to go forward with the program."
Can you tell us some of the reasoning in the decision to postpone, since, as you know, the President's first reaction was to go ahead with tonight's speech?
I think the President, like all Americans, has seen this tragedy unfold on television and has felt keenly what those family members must have felt watching that shuttle go into the air at the Cape, first pride and then second horror. The President feels that these same emotions are being experienced by people all over this nation at this moment. And with the consultation of Congress that's taken place in the last hour or so, the President thought it was entirely appropriate that
At 11:40 a.m. this morning, the space program experienced a national tragedy with the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger approximately a minute and a half after launch from here at the Kennedy Space Center. I regret that I have to report that based on very preliminary searches of the ocean where the Challenger impacted this morning, these searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived. The dedicated crew members of Challenger are Commander Francis.
A great personal loss and sympathy, thinking especially of the husband and the children of Krista McAuliffe, who was lost today in that explosion. And now here is the President of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd planned to speak to you tonight to report on the State of the Union. But the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe. We mourn their loss as a nation together. The families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, "Give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy." They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We've grown used to wonders in this century. It's hard to dazzle us. But for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it. We don't hide our space program. We don't keep secrets and cover things up. We do it all up front and in public. That's the way freedom is, and we wouldn't change it for a minute. We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews And yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue. I want to add that I wish I could talk to every man and woman who works for NASA or who worked on this mission and tell them your dedication and professionalism have moved and impressed us for decades, and we know of your anguish. We share it. There's a coincidence today. On this day, 390 years ago, the great explorer Sir Francis Drake died aboard ship off the coast of Panama. In his lifetime, the great frontiers were the oceans, and a historian later said he lived by the sea, died on it, and was buried in it. Well, today, we can say of the Challenger crew, their dedication was, like Drake's, complete. The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.
President Reagan with a moving statement, a personal statement really, from the White House, from the Oval Office today, explaining that he had hoped tonight to address the state.
Now control.
Roger, roll, Challenger.
Good roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading downrange. Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up. One minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
And the flaming debris got smaller and smaller as it rained for 45 minutes into the Atlantic Ocean just southeast of the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida. Now in slow motion videotape, the critical scenes just before and during the explosion as the orbiter shuttle rides on its own liquid fuel tank and with the solid booster rockets on the sides. The catastrophic explosion left Mission Control in Houston stunned. At a news conference this afternoon, the first official word from NASA since the disaster, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration said simply and directly it did not know what had happened. For CBS News in New York, Dan Rather with Bruce Hall, CBS News at Cape Canaveral, Florida. We'll have full coverage of what happened today and reaction to it on the CBS Evening News later. And shortly, coming up next, on many of these stations, your early local news.